Hello and welcome to our Voices in Montessori podcast, brought to you by the Greenspring Center for Lifelong Learning. Dr. Montessori told us an education capable of saving humanity is no small undertaking. We agree, so let's get to work. I'm Tamara Sheesley Balis, and in today's episode, we're talking about normalizing the pause, an intentional reflection on how biases show up in our classroom. My guest today is Cathy Durand-Horne. Cathy is the Director of Professional Development for MTEI of Atlanta. She's an advanced level state-approved Child Development Associate Trainer. Cathy has an AMS Infant and Toddler Montessori teaching credential and a BA in Psychology and Economics from Denison University. Cathy has over 20 years of experience in the field of early childhood education, serving in a variety of capacities, including administration, teaching, curriculum development, consulting, and providing professional development for teachers. And I have to tell you that I saw Cathy at the American Montessori Society conference, and I said, we're getting her for the podcast because she was such a powerful speaker and really created so much value for everyone that was there today. So we're so excited to have you here today, Cathy. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. I am honored to be here. Honestly, I'm grateful that you invited me to share.
Well, I really have to tell you, we're so glad you said yes. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation today because I know Montessorians are so deeply committed to doing this important work. And it can be hard to know, what does it look like in our classrooms? What is it, in brass tacks, day to day, what does it look like? So love having you here. Thank you for being here. So we're going to dig right in. Okay. So would you start out by sharing what normalizing the pause means, right? People may not even have a real understanding of what that could mean.
Sure, absolutely. Normalizing the pause, when I think about that and how I came up with it really was thinking about situations or times where you've been in situations where you've either said something or done something that you might regret, or maybe had you thought a little bit longer about it before you reacted emotionally, it might have changed how you responded to it. So I started thinking about, when we do self-reflection, or at least when I was a Montessori teacher in the classroom, I found that a lot of times, whether it was on my lunch break and I snuck out to my car to take a quick nap or just decompress from meeting the needs of little people all day long, as we do, I felt like I needed a minute to myself to just pause. And it can be to take a deep breath, it can be to reflect, but really a lot of my time was spent reflecting. What went well this morning? What did not go so well? What are the opportunities for growth? And so a lot of the work that I do when I'm consulting with classroom teachers or administrators is encouraging people to just take a minute, normalize taking a minute. You don't always have to have the right words. You don't always have to have the perfect response in the moment. And sometimes if you just take a minute to normalize pausing before you speak or before you act, or to set intentions about what it is that you want to do, it makes for a much more rewarding experience. So then I started applying this when I was working with the Montessori teachers in training and thinking about, okay, what type of person or what type of teacher do you want to be in this classroom? Dr. Montessori said that the children are absorbing everything, right? So I always say there is no on or off switch. So they're absorbing the good, the bad, the intentional, the unintentional. So why not be more intentional about what it is that we're putting out there for them, whether it's our language, the words that we choose, because even when we think about our interactions, we think about, okay, what I'm doing with the children are the only things that they're absorbing. And that's just not true. So if we begin to normalize the pause and set some intentions, then we can really start to focus and hone in on what it is that we want them to absorb from each of us. So I started thinking like, okay, that doesn't only apply to the classroom, it applies to relationships, it applies to really everything that we do in life. It's about reflecting and then being intentional.
I love that. And I've been hearing a lot about kind of in the social emotional learning world about the different, how you are supposed to take a pause between stimulus and response. And that's really what you discovered in your own self-reflection as a guide and are now bringing to the work of DEIB, which I absolutely love. Okay, so can you give me an example of a time that you might have paused in your own experience in the classroom and that it made a difference for how you responded afterwards?
Sure. I think a lot of times, and I seem to stumble upon lots of examples when I'm working with teachers in the classrooms, and really it can be just something as simple as, not interacting. We know in Montessori, our inclination, or at least my inclination, it took a really long time for me to learn to step back. Dr. Montessori said that any unnecessary help is a hindrance. So for me, that was a real hard one in the classroom because I am a nurturing person. So I want to jump in, especially working with toddlers and with infants. It's hard to take your hands off and step back. So even just in that sense, not wanting to jump in before they spill something, or, that inclination that we have to say, oh, let me do that for you. Step back, let them do it. Or even we were talking recently, I was teaching a course on positive discipline and positive guidance, and we were talking about finding that right moment and it being kind of like a jump rope game. When you're playing jump rope when you're younger and you're on the sideline waiting to jump in, like when's the right moment to jump in? And you get ready and then you pause. Okay, no, not yet, not yet. So I find that we do that same thing in the classroom with the children. Our inclination is to jump right in as opposed to stepping back and just wait, let me see if she's going to get it. Let me see if he's going to be able to do it on his own. Or let me see what they do if they do have a spill. Okay, you have to trust that you've set them up for success, and they know that if they spill, they know where the towels are. They know that it's their responsibility to clean it up. So they automatically go ahead and do that because we've done a good job of, supporting their independence. So I felt like, a lot of times when I was in the classroom, I would jump in. And with my own son, I always use this example in class, prior to probably maybe 13 or 14 months, I would give him a little creamer pitcher with milk, and I would let him have the cup and put my hand over his to mimic him pouring the milk, right? And so right around the time, he wasn't extremely verbal at this point, but I just remember the first time that I stepped back and let him do it for himself. My inclination, of course, was to go ahead and put my hands on top of his and pour the milk. But I said, you know what? I'm gonna let him do it. That's right. And that little tiny spark in his eye when he looked up at me and realized, like, wait, you're not gonna put your hand over mine? You're gonna trust me to do it? And I said, okay, yeah, I need that. He needed me to do that. He needed me to step back so that he could become successful. So it was hard for me as the mom. I wanted to just go ahead and do it for him. I want to create this. And that's not a bad thing. Our intentions are good most of the time. Our intentions are good, but we have to also be just as intentional about stepping back to allow them to grow. So that's just one example, but there are so many others, even with our DEI work, the work that I do in diversity, equity, and inclusion. A course that I teach for our institute is Elevating Peace Education, a deeper look at diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we really get into this idea of culturally responsive teaching and what that looks like in a Montessori classroom. And one of the participants in the last cohort that I taught gave an example of a child who was holding his plate, to eat. He was holding his plate up to his mouth to eat. And a little girl in the class said, why are you holding your plate like that? And the teacher was sharing this story with us in class, and she was sharing it from the perspective that, oh yeah, I taught her that we don't, call out people's differences. And her response in the moment was, and I don't remember her name, but she told the child, you shouldn't say that. That's not nice for you to say that. It's okay for him to eat that way. That's not nice for you to say that. And I stopped her and I said, well, why was that your reaction? And she said, what do you mean? Because it wasn't nice of her to, kind of mock him or make fun of him or talk about the fact that he was doing something different. And I said, why? Why isn't it okay to talk about the fact that he's doing something different? We have lots of differences. The problem is not talking about the differences. The problem is when we assign value solely based on those differences. I said, if you take a step back and pause for a minute. How many lessons could you come up with where you introduce the way that different cultures or even just different families eat, or centered around meal times? I said, that's such a learning opportunity that you missed because your initial reaction was, oh, no, don't talk about that. Don't talk about the fact that he's doing something different. Why not talk about the fact that, oh, there are a lot of different ways that people eat, different families. Some cultures, they take their shoes off. Some cultures, they sit on the floor to eat. Some cultures, they do hold their plates. Some cultures don't even use utensils. So I felt like, I told her, I said, okay, I'm going to let you step back and think about that. And we mapped out this whole month-long lesson plan that she could use in her classroom to account for those teachable moments. And she said, oh, wow, I never even stopped to think about that. I said, yes, you have to stop and think about your reaction, because your reaction in the moment suggested that this child was doing something wrong by noticing a difference. That's not the challenge. It's how we give them, again, there's no on and off switch for their absorbent mind, right? So your reaction is going to become her reaction, saying, oh, okay, I did something wrong. I should not point out differences. I shouldn't even notice them, right? That's not what we want to teach. We have to think about, hey,
that's right.
How do we become more intentional about capitalizing on that teachable moment? How do we become more intentional about demonstrating that it's okay to acknowledge differences in a respectful way and even celebrate them, dare I say?
Well, and can you give us, Cathy, I'm just taking some notes so I remember what to come back to you on, but can you give us an example of if you had that moment, what language would you have used to support that child, the little girl, in understanding? Because I think for many of our early childhood education folks, they want to step into these conversations, but they don't always feel like they have the right words, right? And they want to do it right.
Absolutely. I think sometimes we don't give ourselves enough grace and courtesy. And what I mean by that is we don't allow ourselves to, I think we hold ourselves more accountable in the sense that we think we have to have all of the answers all of the time. And I think that if we just stop to think a little bit, what I tried to do when I was in the classroom, and this was before I had my son, but I tried to treat every child the way that I would want someone to treat my child. So that was always the lens that I viewed my interactions with the children through. If I wanted someone, what would I do with my own child? What would I say to my child if they acknowledged or asked about or pointed out a difference? How would I respond to that? So I wanted to make sure that I was, being sensitive to kind of what the children needed, and at the same time being, not overstepping my bounds in terms of a parental feel, because we know that it's a partnership with parents, but, we're not the only voice or the loudest voice. So we have to kind of tread lightly. But I think in that moment, what I suggested to the teacher was that, she could have said, oh, well, yes, Johnny does hold his plate differently, but you know what? There are families that eat differently all the time. For example, at my house, sometimes we eat on the couch. Or sometimes, we have TV trays and we have different kinds of trays that we eat on, or sometimes little tables. Where do you eat at home? Do you sit at the table with mommy and daddy? Oh, and do you use utensils? And maybe asking the other children around the table, because we know once we start one conversation, they all want to chime in. At my house we do. We use forks. Oh, okay. And sometimes do you use bread? At my house, sometimes we do. Sometimes I just use bread and I pick it up. I don't even have to use my fork. How cool is that? So just making it a conversation, I think, so that it doesn't have to be so heavy. It doesn't have to be this philosophical, I'm about to, give them so much wisdom from, on high. These are the tablets and this is the written law. It's just a conversation, which is what I think, even in having these conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion, or, the differences that we all have, I think it's, again, normalizing those conversations and normalizing the vulnerability to say, I don't have all of the answers. And then even probably in that moment, if I'm talking to this child and opened up this conversation with the other children about how they eat, I might have even had everyone try picking up their plate and holding it and trying, because what we don't want to happen, which is what the teacher described, that after about a week or so, little Johnny stopped holding his plate that way and started doing what everybody else was doing. And I said, oh, but, maybe if you asked his parents, like, oh, culturally, or maybe there's a reason, or maybe there's even just the family culture, that's a difference, that's okay. Maybe asking them like, hey, we noticed the other day that this is something that Johnny does, we think it's fantastic, would you be willing to share any other information or any other habits or cultural norms that your family has? We would love that. Or maybe created one of the things the teacher came up with once I gave her that opportunity to brainstorm a little bit, was coming up with parents sending in pictures of, how they do dinner, for example, or how they eat in their meal times, and sending them in to share. The children were so proud to share their pictures of their family at mealtime and talking about the differences. And true enough, there were some families there who were of an Asian culture, and they said, okay, well, yeah, we take our shoes off, or we sit on pillows, or, one Indian family shared that they use a cloth to, wipe their hands and, pass it around the table. There were just so many things that she was able to learn, even after taking that back, that she came back to the course and shared. She said, you know what? That was a great idea. And I got like a month's worth of lessons. I even suggested going to the library, if people do that anymore. Dating myself probably a little bit there. I'm sorry. She probably Googled it or searched it up, as my son says, on her phone, to figure out, if there are different cultural, mealtime habits and routines, and then trying some of them in her classroom. So she said it really opened a door, to an opportunity that she was actually hesitant to talk about, because she said, no, don't say that. Don't say that he's eating different. That's not nice. And she even used those words. That's not nice. And I said, ooh, actually, why did you say that? Let's talk about that. And I always try to tell them, I'm not saying you did something wrong, but I'm saying, let's unpack that a little bit. What do you think you could have done differently? Or why? Why was it not nice for her to say that? And she's like, well, I said, I didn't hear her making fun of him. She didn't say, I can't believe you do that, or that's awful that you do that. She just asked, which is a natural curiosity that children have. They acknowledge and notice these differences, whether we feel comfortable acknowledging them or have the words, or, want to say something or not. So they're gonna notice it. There is no on or off button to what they absorb and what they notice. They notice all of it.
I love all of those examples. I think people can relate to all of that so much. And really, it's for us turning off our own judgment in our brains that has it be that anything that's different is there, pointing out anything that's different is not nice. Right? Rather than actually saying, wow, this is a moment for an opportunity for curiosity and an opportunity to learn more and discover something. And that's what Montessori is in its essence, right? Peace education is about us reveling and celebrating the differences and learning from each other. And what a beautiful framework to be able to even bring into our youngest Montessori communities.
And even to follow the child, that's what Dr. Montessori admonished us to do, right? So I contend, how can we truly follow the child if we're not taking into account cultural differences or cultural influences, or even on ourselves? Even if you don't understand how to turn it into a teachable moment, bringing in outside criteria or outside subject matter, think about your own self. How do I eat at home? Like, oh, do I always do that? Do I sit on the couch sometimes? Yes. Do I sit at a formal dining room table sometimes? Yes. You could open up a conversation about family celebrations and family meal times, because that looks different on a day-to-day, weekday, as opposed to Thanksgiving or any of the other holidays that we celebrate. So, there's really so much opportunity there. And these young minds, we're giving them language, we're giving them, different thoughts, we're feeding that curiosity that they have, and it can go in so many different directions. I feel like they're going to take their cues from us. And I take me with me into every situation, every conversation. So I've got tons of subject matter in my own life. What do I do? What would I want someone to say to my child? And sometimes it's even doing that self-reflection to think, if I wasn't happy with the way that I taught something, or I held as a long-term belief that, okay, that's wrong, we don't talk about differences, that very well might have been how I was raised or how you were raised, that, ooh, those things are taboo, we don't talk about them. So sometimes we either gravitate towards the way that we were taught, or we intentionally, want to change those things. So again, I can reflect and think about, okay, what do I think about that? What do I believe about that? I think I probably would have done that differently. Or I wish that I had more exposure to X, Y, and Z. Or I wish my parents had maybe had me around people who were a little more different. Not that they didn't do their best job, but then you create those opportunities based on your own self-reflection. What do I want to do differently? And then set some intentions around it.
Mm-hmm. So I love all of that. And let me ask you this, because you do a lot of consulting and you go around and you look at a lot of different early childhood communities, specifically infants to toddlers. Can you talk about what you see in classrooms, in toddler classrooms particularly, that are kind of common pitfalls of showing bias, or where are you seeing this show up, and how can we do better?
I think first and foremost, I think it's an awareness that has to be raised, or kind of this raising of consciousness, to first acknowledge it, because that can be really, really hard. When we talk about bias, that's a sticky subject, because it can sometimes make you feel guilty. It can make you just feel a myriad of emotions, right? Centered around your own thoughts and beliefs. And sometimes it's really hard to admit or acknowledge that, ooh, might not be the right thing, or that might not be the way that I need to look at this. I need to consider another perspective. I think that what I see a lot in classrooms is that we're not giving enough credit to leaning into those differences. And I think sometimes in classrooms, for example, I know, speaking from my own experience, having my son, I'm raising a little Black boy in these United States. That is very, very different. That's very, very challenging at times. And I know that I have often struggled with, looking at some of the stereotypes that are out there that, okay, all little Black boys are gonna act a certain way, or, kind of categorizing the children. I think that that's a natural thing for us to do. Unfortunately, it's a very easy pitfall to fall into, categorizing children and expecting a certain type of behavior. There was a study that I often reference in my class, where they had educators observe children. And I think there was I might be getting all the details wrong, but you can search it up. As my son says, you can search it up. But they had educators look at a little Black boy, a little white boy, a little Black girl, and a little white girl. And they were watching, I feel like they told them that they were looking for a certain type of behavior, like they were looking for challenging behaviors. And they tracked their eyes, to see which child they were looking at the most. Not that the children were actually doing very different things, but a majority of them were spending their time focusing on the little Black boy in the scenario, as opposed to all of the children. And he wasn't doing anything different. And I've experienced that even in my own, like I said, now having my son. And once he was in a Montessori school as well, it changed how I was viewing those observations too, when I was doing my consultation visits. And I started to notice, not in his class in particular, but, raising my consciousness to think about, okay, wait, how are people viewing my child? It made me more aware of kind of how teachers are viewing children. It's very easy to fall into the trap of labeling a child. And I find that is, for multiple reasons, right? It can be because of behavior that they are showing. It can be behavior that they're not showing. It can be because of a bias that we've held, a long held belief that, oh, okay, this is how they act. This is how, this child could be socioeconomic status. It could be, what you've decided about the parents. It could be any of those things that are affecting this bias that you have or that have created this bias. And then you see it play out in the classroom and you become comfortable there. You become comfortable thinking, oh, well, the parents don't spend time with her. That's why she acts that way. Or she spends more time with the nanny than she does with her parents. Or, there's so many reasons that we assign to the children. And then we in turn expect a certain type of behavior based on the bias that we've created in our minds. And unfortunately, sometimes it does come to play. We can skew our observation or our assessments based on those things. And I think that once I started bringing this to teachers, awareness or to their level of consciousness, initially it's met with resistance, of course. Are you accusing me of being racist? Are you accusing me of being biased? And I said, we're all biased. So that's the first step, right? We all have some bias. And it's not, the first step is acknowledging it and then desiring to do something different. So when I started pointing out to teachers sometimes that I was seeing, like, did you notice that you automatically had little Timmy sit next to your chair and you kept referring back to him and acknowledging his behavior when his counterparts who are of a different race are doing the exact same thing and you didn't say anything? You continued on and you may have commented once, but little Timmy over there who's doing the exact same thing, you're continually commenting, that's why you're getting snack last, that's why you're sitting there, that's, and so I started to see it sitting back, oh, I never even paid attention to that. And then with my own son, I started to realize the impact that it has on the child, and that to me was way more alarming. Like, wow, how does little Timmy feel if every day, every time you're automatically going to go ahead and exclude him before he even has a chance to do anything? And as I'm teaching positive guidance, I'm saying, no, you can't continue to make children pay for behavior choices that they had yesterday. It's a fresh slate. Can you imagine if we were held accountable for everything we did, every misstep? If that never went away, we didn't get that grace and courtesy of a fresh start.
Right.
So we got to give that grace and courtesy of a fresh start to the children. We got to lean in. We can't take it personally. This child didn't have this behavior because, it's a personal attack against me. They deserve that fresh start. They deserve that same grace and courtesy that I would expect someone to give to me. You got to give that to the children too. Grace and courtesy is not just about teaching manners and saying please and thank you. It's a level of respect. It's a level of social interaction. It's a level of, I call it, because I'm a believer, the golden rule, and I obviously didn't coin that phrase, but, you're doing unto others as you would have them do unto you. It's that same grace and courtesy that extends even to the children. We think about that on an adult level, but not on a child level. So I think that that's what I see the most, is that teachers aren't necessarily aware of their biases, or they're not necessarily aware of what they're bringing into the room, their energy, their, like I said, those biases, those are the things, because it's a way of life. It's what we do. So raising the consciousness, then dealing with it and identifying intentional ways to change that is really what about, even that's normalizing the pause. Like, take a step back, think about that a little bit. Why did you do that? Why is that child's behavior affecting me or triggering something in me? Why is that? And is that their issue or my issue? So be very honest with yourself. It's, I wrote a class on professionalism, and I often reference the Michael Jackson song, I'm starting with the man in the mirror.
That's right.
That's what you have to do. Like you have to look in that mirror. It's hard, but you have to think about that, like, ooh. And sometimes I heard someone say that we often, the child that we have the most difficulty with is often because we see characteristics in them that are the things that we don't like about ourselves. Ooh, that's heavy. Like that's kind of heavy to think about. Like, oh yeah. Right. For me, that child who talks incessantly, hey, guess what? That's the story of my life. And it's what I do for a living now. So
now you get paid to talk.
That's why I can't fault my child. I tell his teachers all the time, he has it on. It's sorry. He's in trouble for talking. I got nothing. Sorry.
Right.
I haven't mastered it yet myself. So. And
Well,
I've enabled it into a career. So
I think that those folks who you're having those conversations with are so lucky to have someone who's willing to step into the conversation and point it out to them, because our growth and development is the key to really supporting these children long term. So really, what a gift. And for all of us, we all think we don't do it. And I saw that study that you referenced. And it was interesting because there wasn't a lot of difference between the race of the teachers in the study.
Right, exactly. I have found that to be the case as well.
Right? It's not like we're just talking about white.
No, nope.
Have this bias.
Nope.
These students are facing bias from everyone.
Exactly. It is, and you're absolutely right. Some of the more difficult conversations that I have been with teachers who are the same race as the child, because they're thinking, no. How can I be biased? If it's a Black child, hey, I'm Black. What do you mean? Like, that's a misconception. Let's talk about that. I said I keep saying the more I do this work, the more I'm going to write a class. Like, why do I need DEI? I'm in the minority. Like, I don't need DEI. What do you mean? How be biased? That doesn't apply to me, right? And it was some of those conversations that they're like, wait, I don't understand. And it was a genuine, help me understand how. And I think the bigger part, which is what I try to get at in the class, is that we have to have points of connection even to be able to have the conversations, So I'm not accusing teachers, I'm not attacking teachers when I'm pointing these things out, because I've had a connection with them on some level, and they do a lot of great things. You're doing wonderful. It's that, sandwiching it in with the praise, yes, these are things that you do really, really well. But have you ever noticed that this is what happens? Or do you ever notice, or if I'm asking, so why was Timmy sitting next to you? Like, why did you have him go sit next to your chair? So we're talking through it, and they're like, oh, well, Miss Cathy, you don't understand. He always does this, and he always does that. Always. Does he? Okay. And if someone held you accountable for things you always do, how would that feel? So I try to make it personal in a way that they can relate. I'm not attacking you. I'm not accusing you. I'm not calling you racist. I'm just saying, take a minute to pause so that you're more aware of your interactions, and then set some intentions around changing that. Is there an opportunity for growth here? What if you didn't do that? What would happen if you didn't make him sit there? What would happen if you had another friend sit there? And then what impact do you think that that's having on him? Is he starting? What I noticed with my own child when he was in that situation is that after a while, he stopped saying, I didn't do it, or I didn't do anything. It was just like, oh, okay, I guess I am. I guess I am the bad child. I guess I am that child. I guess I am always in trouble and making bad choices. No, you're not. Let's change that thought pattern, because that's what they see.
Well, and I have to say, it's you have an impact on the child, right? You're building a case against them, this poor child who, deserves the same fresh slate you talked about every day. But the other thing that you're doing is you're communicating to the other children how this child is to be treated.
Absolutely.
And I don't think we can underscore enough how all of those children are taking their cues. We also find this when children have a learning difference in the classroom. Right. That's how we're teaching them to treat. So if you have a little Black boy in your class that you are, focused on in the way you were just talking about, every other child is learning that that's also how that child is to be treated.
I shared in my most recent cohort of the course that I teach, of the DEI course that I teach. I'm trying to remember, can't remember his name, but anyway, there was they did a kind of like a revamped version of the doll study. So the doll study was done, I want to say initially like back in the 60s, and they had children respond to dolls of different colors. And you can Google, you can search it up. It's on the CNN study, right? Exactly. But they did a remake of the doll study, and they had children. They were looking at them, and they had pictures of dolls on this, strip of paper, and they're having them. It was Anderson Cooper. So if you want to look that up, it was a CNN study with Anderson Cooper. It was a remake of the doll study, and so he had different children of all different races, and they're looking at this sheet of paper with all of these different colored dolls on them, right? So there were some who were white, they were lighter skin, all the way to really, really dark skin, right? And so they're asking the children different questions. Which doll would you say is smart? Can you point to the one that you think is the smartest? Can you point to the one that you think is dumbest? Which doll do you think is mean? Which one do you think teachers like the most? Which one do you think teachers like the least? Which one would you want to be friends with? Which one would you not want to be friends with? So they're asking them very pointed questions like that. And it's really eye-opening. It was eye-opening for me when I saw it, and then it was eye-opening for me, for the people who were in my class as well, to show them that really had such a strong impact, because again, those are the things, like you just said, the way that I'm treating Timmy, I'm modeling, they're absorbing that. There's no switch, right? Good, bad, unintentional. They're absorbing it all. This is how Timmy needs to be treated. And when we don't intentionally acknowledge and, interact in a different way to show them something different, to model something different, they're left to their own devices to figure out why. Now, you may think that it's because, this is his behavior. But what they're absorbing is, okay, the children who look like him act like this, and therefore need to be treated like this because they look like this. So again, it's back to my initial statement about we're now assigning value based upon the difference. And it was very heartbreaking. And there were some children on there who definitely, didn't subscribe to that theory and were able to verbalize it and saying, well, I would want to be friends with all of them, or, well, I think all of them are smarter. I don't think, anybody's going to be smarter than the other. But, even to see some of the children who looked, had the same skin tone as some of the dolls, you're pointing to the one that you think is the dumbest, and their skin looks like yours. And they're asking them, well, why do you think that? Because he has dark skin. Why do you think that's the good child? Why do you think that's the smart child? Because they have light skin. So if you think about it in the context of our history, and you think about historically, we would love to think that that stuff doesn't exist, or those beliefs are, not around anymore, but they are, and they're getting passed down almost unconsciously, in some cases, unfortunately, consciously, but it's unconscious because they are absorbing it. They are paying attention to how we treat each other, or how you treat the children. And I always say, definitely how we treat each other. My coworkers, if we can't, if I'm treating my coworker that way, they're picking up on that too. They pick up on the tension, they pick up on my words. And even what I started to see in my own personal experience with my son was that in his class, the children did start to say, oh, Josiah did this, Josiah did that. Oh, because, and sometimes some of the assistant teachers would tell me he actually didn't do that, and I'm like, wow, but, or even if you think about it on the basic level, we've all had those children in our room that we say their first and last name, right? Because they're in trouble. Timmy Smith. I don't know a Timmy Smith. So if you have a child named Timmy Smith, it's not personal. I just always use that as my example. Use it. Timmy Smith. Feet are for walking, or, Timmy Smith, teeth are for eating food. Those things, you say the first and last name for that emphasis. And then you hear the other children saying it at other times. Timmy Smith. I'm like, ooh, is that how I sound? Oh, wow. Same intonation, same, hand on the hip, the same thing. They can be a great mirror if you want to do some self-reflection. My goodness, watch the children in your class. They probably act like you. Like I said, the same type of inflection, same everything. And so when you see it, it's jarring because you're like, oh gosh, that's not the message I want to send. That's not how I want them to treat Timmy. That's not fair, because look at what it's doing to Timmy. And he's taking on that persona now that, hey, yeah, I'm the bad one. I'm the one in the class who gets in trouble every day. And I was seeing that happen with my child. And it was, from a mother's standpoint, it was heartbreaking, because I'm like, oh, or I'd say, who did you play with today? It's like, no one, no. I'm like, whoa, not my child. He's very sociable, or he was. So me seeing a difference, I'm like, uh-oh.
That's
Yeah.
right. That's
Even
right.
under the age of 3, it's like, ooh, wow. I don't want to set him up for that. This is his first
Oh,
experience with school. I don't want him to think that this is what it is. So I had to intentionally change that. And then also help those teachers because they're not aware. So even sometimes not just hearing me say it, and I'm coming from a place that's not accusatory, I'm
right.
helping,
That's
I'm
right.
trying to help you understand and grow and see firsthand what it's doing. You don't have to listen to my words. Look at this doll study. Listen to children. When you hear children articulating the biases that we have,
Mm-hmm.
and they don't even know why. They
Mm-hmm.
just know that, oh, that's bad. It must be. We think we're doing something better by not engaging in the conversations or not bringing up the subject or not talking about the differences.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, we got to change that intentionally. Talk
Mm-hmm.
about it, because then you're teaching them how to respect and acknowledge differences and celebrate them.
Mm-hmm.
So that it really won't be a big deal that you're mixed with someone. Our brain's inclination is to protect us, right? That's a
That's
part of
right.
our brain. It does that. So
Yep.
it protects us from those things we perceive as threats or fear, those things we fear. So, we gotta change that. You shouldn't fear it just because it's different from you. But
Mm-hmm.
they're learning that from us.
I love that. This is so helpful. And we probably have a few more minutes here. I
Okay.
just want to know from you, what can we do as educators? What I'm taking away is we have to look in the mirror.
Absolutely.
We have to normalize the pause, which
Mhm.
taking that break where you're talked about bringing curiosity,
Mhm.
right? Being
Absolutely.
open to feedback.
Absolutely.
And if you walk into a toddler classroom, what is it that helps you know that this is a team that is doing this work? Like, what do you see in action? And I don't know if that's a fair question.
No, it is. I think it is. I think that the classrooms that I see that are really leaning in are the classrooms where, teachers are thoughtful in their responses and intentional in their language, intentional in their body language, intentional in their, the way that they've put material in the classrooms, particularly in a toddler classroom. We know that Dr. Montessori did work, started the work for infants and toddlers, like in the last 10 years of her life. So it's not as detailed as the work that she did with the primary age group, in terms of materials, specific materials. But when we think about that classroom, I think that that also allows us an opportunity, it affords us an opportunity to be a little bit more creative with what we're putting in the classroom,
Mm,
whether that's books on different subject matters, whether that's, the conversations that are happening at the, in social settings like meal times and things like that. It's, the interactions or the influence of parents in the classroom. Do they have a family culture questionnaire? Are you celebrating, are you allowing children to celebrate their differences? Are you, it could be different music even. I've had that conversation before too. Like you could play different music from around the world. You could talk about different sports from around the world. In your language section of your classroom, is it reflective of different cultures?
mm,
Because that representation is important not only for children in the minority, but for children in the majority as well, because they need to be exposed to different cultures and know that there are differences so that they don't fear them. So I'm seeing it reflected in the material. I'm hearing it reflected in the conversation in by way of a respect for differences that undoubtedly arise in the classroom. I've seen some materials, for example, one of the videos that I use in the classroom has a school that talks about, and I'm sure, I think we've all seen them. I think Crayola has produced they have crayons with different skin tones. And I've seen that in art projects. I've seen that reflected and talking about, oh, wow, your eyes are different. My eyes are blue. My eyes are brown. Oh, look at your eyes, so embracing those differences in a way that's not emotionally charged with this
mm,
is taboo. So I'm hearing the conversation, I'm seeing the interactions, I'm seeing the nurturing, I'm seeing children being treated fairly and in an equitable manner. They're getting what they need. I'm seeing assessments that take into account there may be some cultural differences here that have led to a difference in development. So I'm looking at all of it. When I come in, I'm looking at, the assessments that we're doing, to measure their development, because that's a significant impact. If you have a child from a family who, have fed their child typically longer than, another, when they're coming in the classroom and they're unable to feed themselves, instead of marking that as a deficiency, I'm using that as an opportunity to guide them toward lessons that help them develop that skill. So it's really an awareness on the teacher's part, and it's reflected in her interactions, his or her interactions, in her language, his or her language, in the material in the classroom, in the subject matter that's being presented at circle time, in the stories that they're reading, in the art materials that are on the shelves. So I'm seeing it everywhere, and I'm seeing children being treated, like I said, given a fresh start. And being treated with that grace and courtesy that we expect for ourselves.
I love that. And I appreciate all those examples of prepared environment. What does it mean to have a prepared environment that is really prepared in DEIB work? I love that. Now, what about, I think you have some opportunities in practical life to really have, maybe you have a Japanese setup for eating.
Absolutely. Right? Absolutely. Yes, we love, so at our training institute, we do have some materials that are, like we'll have, things where children can practice with chopsticks, or practice, like just different things like that, that introduce a cultural element. It sparks that curiosity, like, oh, what are these? What are these used for? Oh, wow. Well, let me show you, and let's talk about that. Then let's find out if anybody in here uses these at home. It's just something so simple that's on that shelf. Even with different foods, I've often done that in my food prep area. I've asked parents to bring in, and I've had a couple of other schools do the same thing. Like, they typically would do it around holiday times. It's a cultural celebration where they're talking about different foods, different fruits, different, like if their parents from the islands, we're talking about different island fruits, and maybe they bring some in that we can use as a taste testing, or it just sparks it. Then we can find a book to tie it to it. So it's just expanding upon those little things that are there culturally, that we could really bring out and pull out if we're more intentional. But that doesn't mean that we have done it wrong all these years, because I know that I didn't have this level of awareness the whole time I was in, the whole time I was teaching, and I think I did a fantastic job. But there's another opportunity for growth. It's not a criticism of what we were doing. It's a way to expand and take this opportunity to plant these seeds. We have a unique opportunity to plant these seeds in these little people, these little minds, especially since all of that development, that brain development, that 90% that happens by age 5, why not take the opportunity to plant some seeds? And maybe it'll stick. Maybe we can make a difference, even if it's just with one child in their thinking. And I always say, use the children against your parents. If I have a friend who's, if my close friend is of a different race and my parents have other thoughts on that, I'm teaching them that, hey, no, right. I love Tamara. She's my best friend. You know how they do that. She can come to my party. She can, No, I love her. I'm hugging her. I'm touching her. There's nothing wrong with that. Exactly. Right. We normalize that, that acceptance and that respect. Yeah, she has brown skin. I don't. It's okay. Look, it's different. Different doesn't mean bad. So.
Or in my case, red. Truth be told, when I was first in the classroom, I taught actually bilingual. And so I had all Latino. And I think they say Latinx now, and anyway, so they said, they would always say, oh, we only need 2 colors for Tamara, yellow and red.
Yellow and red.
Yellow and red. That was the only colors I needed. So those were very available in the palette, right? They were not used. And I have to say, Cathy, what a beautiful, important conversation, because between the ages of 0 and 6, we know that foundation is laid for their lifetime, lifetime. And we have so much power. We have so much capacity to make a difference. And you said maybe it's one child, but that one child could impact thousands and thousands of people in their lifetime. So every one child that we make a difference for, what a remarkable impact on our world.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
you're touching so many lives right now.
I hope so. I hope so.
You are. You
I
are.
appreciate this opportunity.
Well, with the podcast, with being a teacher trainer, you're out consulting, you're doing so many things. And I just want to really say thank you for taking time to spend time with us today, because I think that this information, like I'm going to send it out to my toddler team and really probably my children's house team, because they ask the question a lot. Like they want to be in the work of DEIB, but they're not sure, what does that look like? And you just gave us such practical tips for what does that look like in an early childhood classroom. And
Mhm.
I think that's so important because we want to be in the work. We're looking for, Dr. Montessori gave us roadmaps on so many things. We are looking for guidance. So thank you. This was just such an important, such a big and powerful conversation, and one that's, you bring such the gift of so much love and so much authenticity to this. I imagine people are so comfortable talking to you about things that they maybe haven't talked to anybody else about.
True. Yes.
Right? Right? I really appreciate you and really thank you for being here. Is there anything else you want to make sure that our folks hear before, like anything else you want to make sure they hear before we wrap up today?
Think so. I just think that this work is so important. I think that we need to not miss the opportunity. And that's what I try to do in my consulting and anything that I put out there. My own company is Intentional Logic. And I just think that that's such a powerful thing, that we can be intentional about what we're learning. We can be intentional about then what we're teaching. We can be intentional about, our lives and what we're putting out there as people and how we relate. So I think that that's, I am working on the book, Normalizing the Pause, which, really talks about, all of these things and then some additional things for how you apply it to your life personally. And so I'm trying to get the word out there and try to get, I think there are more people who follow this line of thought and this logic, who, like you said, just don't necessarily know where to start or where to find the words, or think they have to have all of the answers before they start to do this work. And you really don't. It's just a layer of vulnerability and humility that says, hey, I don't have all the answers. So how do I start? How do I do this? So, okay, I can go as slow as I need to. I can go as fast as I need to, but okay, that's the first step. That's the part we can't get over. If you can acknowledge that, hey, you don't have all the answers. I don't have all the answers. And I start every training session, I start with that. I teach with that. I'm not an expert. I don't have all of the answers. I don't necessarily have all of the right answers, but hey, let's figure it out. If we have a point of connection and we're all willing to work and be open to the opportunity, then, we can do it. We can make a difference. So I think that's what I like to, that's the message I like to send, we can be intentional about it.
I love that. And I love the intentionality. And I also want to let our listeners know that if you're looking to get in touch with Cathy, you want to bring her in as a consultant or to your school as a speaker, we will have her contact information also in our show notes. And you can find her at the Intentional Logic Group, all one word.com. And you can also follow her on Instagram at intentional_logic. So I just want to make sure, if you're like me and you don't look to the show notes, that you have that information, because that's important. I just want to say thank you so much for spending time with us today. We so appreciate your knowledge and your expertise and your heart and the heart you bring to this work. And I just really thank you.
Thank you so much. It was my pleasure.
And to our listeners, we are so glad you spent your time with us today too. You're doing the work in making our world a better place, a more peaceful place for everyone. So thank you for all you bring. This is the Montessori Revolution, and we're definitely better together. We'll see you next time.